I hate herbivores. Hate them. Can't stand to spend a single moment with them. Honestly, all humans hate herbivores, if we're really honest with ourselves. At least those of us who met them do. I'm sure children who've never left Earth have some idealistic notions about the friendly grass eaters, and imagine how mean carnivores must be. I guess in that sense all humans were children before we went to space. We had this idea of the sharp-toothed predator species that would come to eat us all. We all dreamed of fending off their attacks against the Earth. It was only after we rose to the stars that we realized that was insane. Every predator lives its life weighing risk and reward for every use of violence. Predators start fires when they know they can win. A house cat goes after a little mouse, not a big rabbit that might actually be capable of fighting back. Any carnivore species that achieved sapience did so in a society filled with individuals with natural weapons and an innate knowledge of how to use them. Any individuals who were quick to pick a fight with their peers were weeded out. That's not to say they had empathy for other species, far from it. Every carnivore I've ever met has been cold. They love their mates and their families, yes, and sometimes even extended empathy to other members of their own species. But anyone else could be hit by an asteroid in front of them, and they'd feel nothing, as long as no one was going to retaliate against them for the death. But they universally seemed to live by a strict rule of never fighting anyone who was capable of fighting back except as a last resort. For all their sociopathy, if a carnivore species tries to colonize a planet and discovers some species on it has gotten at least as far as muskets, they start negotiating. Of course, they could take the planet, or just avoid whatever section had those pesky sapiens, but fighting might get a few of them hurt, and nuking from orbit tends to decrease the value of a planet. And, if you ignore a sapient race, you risk future aggression whenever they get around to splitting the atom. So better to just agree it's their planet, and if they let you take what you want, they can have spaceflight. To an advanced race getting to plunder the resources of an entire planet, a few rocket ships are surprisingly cheap. Herbivores, though, never learned that kind of lesson. To them, violence was to be used in self-defense, or for territory, or mates, or something else important. Paradoxically, it created the perfect environment for creatures who believed in violence among peers, honourable combat and all that nonsense. Yes, herbivores had empathy, but they also had anger and paranoia and could make rash decisions. So imagine our surprise when we found out it was the carnivores who had written the Galactic Accords, and that the herbivores were the reason for the rules exempting diplomats from all duels. Duels were an unnecessary risk to carnivores, but to herbivores they were a chance to show off. So, most herbivore species had at least some history of such things. And what of the omnivores, you ask? Well, we're it. It's the weirdest thing. Every other spacefaring race is either a herbivore who honed their intelligence evading predators, or a carnivore who did it chasing prey. We had to adapt because the forests turned into savannas was a new one for them. And yes, plenty of herbivores occasionally eat insects and maybe a rodent, and lots of carnivores still need some leaves and grass for good digestion. But for the most part, it's one or two staple foods that they plop in their mouth or some equivalent. Most of them don't even have taste in the way we think of it. Either food or not food is all their food intake organs really seem to register. The kind of complex food preparation rituals we require always seem bizarre to most species. I once had to break for lunch from a meeting with a Gardesian. The process of making coffee, and having to heat up and consume 3 separate items from my lunchbox, was seen with the kind of understanding Gardesians usually reserve for species that try to summon the spirits of their ancestors to bring good fortune. Beyond that, they all have a rule to check the ingredients in any food a human offers you. Carnivore and herbivore alike. As it turns out, caffeine is a deadly poison to 80% of the galaxy, and 3 out of 5 species will melt if they touch alcohol. They literally had to amend the Galactic Accords for us regarding that one, since, as written, any alcohol held for non-industrial uses was considered a chemical weapon, and we weren't about to get rid of our booze. Of course, there was just one more reason to see humans as unnatural. Above all, it was our empathy they hated. Herbivores always believed it was feigned, and that we must be plotting something. We were predators. Why would we act like we were upset when a non-human showed signs of pain? And carnivores simply couldn't understand it. Why would we choose to eat meat grown in a vat rather than kill animals for it? And cooking it? Don't even get them started on that. And of course, both of them had issues with dogs. Something about another apex predator living on our couches unsettled them. A few of their academics eventually seemed to get the pack dynamics, at least on an intellectual level, but it was something accepted more than truly understood. You domesticated animals for labor if you were a herbivore, or food if you were a carnivore. A few of them understood companionship from animals, but not from something like a wolf. But, getting back to my point, I hate herbivores. And I have been assigned as the ambassador to the single most annoying herbivore race of all, the Gwendians. They were every stereotype we believed in before we found other life in the universe. Small, furry creatures who suffer from extreme paranoia and hate anything that eats meat. They just kind of ignore the fact that carnivores saved them from likely extinction. How? Well, you see, most herbivores wipe out all their natural predators when they reach a certain technological level. But the Gwendians? They set out to wipe out every predator in existence, down to predatory insects. They were so skittish they'd never expanded beyond the continent where they evolved, except for research expeditions, so this meant wiping out predators even on the 80% of their planet that had no Gwendians. Naturally, they didn't even get close. They managed to get maybe 27% of all predatory species before their ecosystem started to completely collapse from the overpopulation of prey animals. They lucked out though, and the Kratals showed up just in time and saw a massive game reserve. So they made a deal. The Kratals get the ecosystem back in balance and they get to hunt and eat whatever they want. Also, mineral rights and fossil fuels. Lots of those. The Kratals weren't stupid. They were very efficient about it, bringing in some species from off-world, cloning others back from extinction, and just genetically engineering some new predators of their own creation. The whole time they did this, the Gwendians were raging at the existence of their own saviors. So yeah, herbivores are annoying, and the Gwendians are the worst. All this going through my mind as I disembarked from my shuttle. Rapture let out a bark as he ran ahead of me, happy to be back in open space. But, being well trained, he stayed close by, and turned his head back to me. I gave the dog a subtle hand signal, and he returned to my side, taking on his best dignified pose as we walked. The Kratals actually recommended bringing Rapture. They were certain it would throw the Gwendian ambassador off his game to have another sharp-toothed carnivore sniffing at him. They seemed to find the idea rather amusing. I think they regretted not having their own domesticated co-predator. Above all, they just seemed to be sick of dealing with the Gwendians. The Gwendian diplomat stood at the end of the runway. He was about 3 feet tall and covered in what looked like brown hair. I say looked like because it wasn't made of keratin, so it wasn't technically hair. At least that's what the pedantic xenoanthropologists who prepped me for this mission said. It was just a coat of something. The Gwendians stood on 4 legs with 2 arms. Technically, their structure could be compared to a centaur, but their coat was so thick and their hind legs so relatively close to their front legs that seeing them that way was difficult. The only part of the diplomat that wasn't covered in his thick coat were his pure black eyes staring up at me, occasionally blinking as he bobbed up and down. I realized the bobbing wasn't something the Gwendians did naturally. Rather, the diplomat had started his traditional greeting, evidently not bothering to wait for me to be in earshot. He was dancing back and forth while chanting. The translator in my ear was able to tell me the words, but the dialect was so archaic, most Gwendians allegedly couldn't understand what half of it meant. So, many words I could only assume were mistranslations.
Greetings! Far away! Eating contest! Water filter. Goodwill. Day and night. Our accountants have completed the landfill.
Rapture approached the diplomat, just as he'd been trained to do, and sniffed him. The diplomat fell over backwards, letting out a cry and shaking over the ground. This time it was really shaking. The Gwendians do shake from fear, the same as humans. It's the weirdest thing. Rapture, I called, and the dog obediently ran back to me. I leashed him. It was exactly as we had rehearsed. A vicious predator, and the unhinged omnivore that could control him. At least that was what the Gwendians would think. Certainly such things always made for favourable trade negotiations. They were fun, too. God, I hate herbivores.